Welcome today. I'm Judy Slack, and this TV program is a very long project that I was involved in over about the last 10 years. And after our program today, I would like anybody in the audience who had anything to do with TV, at any time, even currently, I'd like for you to be up in the corner. I'd like to take a photograph of everyone who has a connection to Tepee Lodge. And when I was manager at the Wyoming room, Bill Rader and Jack Pellissier came in and asked if I knew anyone who could write a book about Tepee. Well, I said, I just finished with my Hemingway book. I probably could try it. So Jack Pellissier connected me with Ike Fordyce, and then Jane Rader started collecting items off of the internet, and we proceeded to have a lot of material for this book. When Jack connected me with Ike Fordyce, I don't know if very many of you knew Ike when he was managing Tepee Lodge, but Ike could be cantankerous. He was a very difficult boss. And I worked for him for a couple of summers, and he and his wife, Gwen, and that was back in the 60s. So I realized, when I look back on that, Ike had a lot of stress in his life at that time. He was taking care of Tepee Lodge, but he also had a ranch down here to take care of in the summertime. How was he dealing with, doing the haying, etc.? So you have to stop and think. There were 150 horses or so, about 100 guests. We also had 20 to 30 employees. He had to feed us 3 meals a day, and then going up and down Red Grade was quite a challenge. I see Sally is coming, so I'm going to stop right now until Sally can come in and get situated. Wonderful. Hi, Sally. Welcome. Oh, I'm so glad you guys came. I'm going to wait for Mike as well. We do have some more people that I know that are coming. But Ike was just an absolute gentleman. I got to know him 2013 or so. He came to Sheridan, and hi, Mike. Glad you came. So he was, at that time, a professional photographer, and he brought all of his photographs and gave them to the Wyoming room. So we have all of his hundreds of gorgeous photos when he was a professional photographer. We had a showing for him, and then he also brought scrapbooks upon scrapbooks of Tepee Lodge. And I couldn't have asked for a nicer person to work with throughout putting this book together. Probably 90% of the book was provided by Ike, the stories, and then the connections that he gave me to the families and to the former employees. He was just nothing but a gentleman. So early on in the development of Tepee Lodge, we had 5 homesteaders. And that's how the homesteads were back then, in the early part of the 1900s, and I believe that's still the boundary of Tepee Lodge today. Each of the homesteaders received 160 acres. The majority of them were from England, so there was an English connection early on. We figured out that Mike Evans, who you will hear his name throughout, his brother was married to Oliver Henry Wallop's sister. So that was the English connection through the Wallops. And as soon as these Englishmen came to the United States, they worked really hard to get their citizenship, and shortly after them they got these homesteads. Many of them did not stay around, and from about 1904 to 1913 is when the collection of all of the pieces of Tepee were put together, and the association was made up, and they had stock. in Tepee. It was basically a hunting and fishing camp. So one of the early guests that came up from Eaton's Dude Ranch was William Fordyce, and he just loved Tepee. So he started buying the shares from the original homesteaders as time went on. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how he ended up with most of the shares. Mike Evans eventually went bankrupt, and many of the older landowners decided to sell their stock, go back to England, and some of them moved to California. So William Fordyce ended up with a few more shares of stock. He gave his shares to his son Allen when Allen graduated from Harvard in 1929. So there was just a few stockholders left, and so what happened in about 1930, of course, we had the stock market crash in 29, so Allen was able to then buy out the rest of the stockholders, and by 1933, Allen owned Tepee Lodge. So he was the sole owner. And then William, his dad, came to visit quite often, and so did his brother Will. And this is Mike Evans on the left, and his father-in-law was Colonel Burgess, and they stayed probably longer than any of the other homesteaders. And then we have this first photograph of Tepee. This was taken in 1909. It's dated September 15th. It says, "Dear grandmother, I wish you were here. The cabin with the cross is ours. I send you a kiss and my love, William." So this is Alan's brother who sent this to the grandmother, and it was to Mrs. Orrick. And of course, the Orrick family would do, when I worked at Tepee, all of the cabins were named, and Orrick was one of the cabins that we cleaned. I don't know if Tepee still has the names of the original cabins, but Orrick was one over by the rec hall. So over on the left, you'll see a note from Ike. I had a really tough time reading his handwriting. So you can tell I had to call Ike quite often so he could interpret what he said. But he was always just very kind and helpful at identifying all the photographs. There was first the English connection, but when William Fordyce purchased Tepee, it ended up being this St. Louis, Missouri connection. And the other thing that occurred throughout is that we have some really old photographs from different collections, and the one on the bottom in the right, that was taken by Party Erdman, and that is Eleanor Donwade's husband, and Eleanor was the one who purchased Folly Ranch when she was 18 years old. Folly Ranch is just south of Tepee, and so there was a friendship and relationship between Folly and also Tepee. Now the reason it was called Folly is because Eleanor's dad thought it was quite like a folly that she wanted to buy this ranch when she was 18 years old. She was a guest at Tepee. She heard that it was going to be sold. She went down off the mountain, came down here and sent a telegram to her dad sometime in about 1918, and said he wanted to, she wanted to buy Folly Ranch. She was 18 years old, and the next day he had sent her a check to buy Folly Ranch. So it was Eleanor's Folly. That's why it's called Folly Ranch. So Party Erdman gave photographs to a man by the name of Louis McKay. And McKay, I believe, was a guest, and then later he owned a cabin at Tepee. And for those of you who don't know who Louis McKay was, he was an attorney during the Civil Rights Act, and he was a very well-known attorney back in the 60s. Another family from St. Louis was Kim and Chrissy Love's family. So the Loves were here early on. And this is their aunt, Martha. She was a guest there for many summers. And Chrissy shared these photos with us.
You go find a chair, Mary. Right here.
So we have this collection from the Love family. Down in the corner is Mike Evans with a coyote. Another photograph that was shared by Hardy Erdman. You'll notice throughout that we have winter photos with TV. And so the winter photo down in the corner is a great shot of the vehicle that they took up there in the winter. This is another very early photo. Ike and I figured out that this was taken earlier than 1927. And the snowpack, they had to have had horses to get in and out. Don't think vehicles get in there throughout the winter. It's very possible that they had maybe hay wagons to haul in various supplies. Now, this collection is from, I think it's the Dahlgren family. And the Dahlgrens had a lot of photographs. Now, anybody who wants to see the photographs, there's hundreds of them. Please call me and I can show them to you. We can share them. It's just that not all of them got in the book. So just know that I have those photographs. Up in the upper corner, there is an entertainer. And the dudes are all dressed up. They must have just arrived. You're seeing tents in these early photos. So the dudes, when they came, would stay in tents. Then the middle photo is, I believe, dated 1932. And it's really amazing to see this because when I worked at Tepee, we had to go up and down the mountains in a cattle truck. This is the only picture we have that looks like, and down in somewhat of a cattle truck. But it's the only photo I have of dudes in the back of a truck. And this is in front of the Bighorn Merc. And down in the other corner is Alan Fordyce. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you didn't know Alan, he always wore white shirts. So throughout this, you're going to see him in white shirts except for once. White shirt. Another early photograph of Bighorn. And we have Bighorn Merc in those two photographs. I wanted to point this out to you that when Hemingway was here, it's just about the same time that this photo was taken. So he went into the Merc to get his mail, and look at how run down the front of that sword is. Up in the middle is Big Bones Alderson, and over the years, the different dude ranches would come up to Tepee for dances and for rodeos. And so the Bones brothers had a dude ranch in southern Montana, and so this must have been one of those times when they visited. And he's with a couple of dude ladies. They always had a dress-up day, and maybe Mike and Sally and Sonny, do you remember if it was just once a year that there was a dress-up day? Or was it once a week?
How'd we get dressed up?
Silly pants.
Oh, my dad was a master of dress-up. He always wore that straw hat with all the buttons and had that little chariot with a 55-gallon bucket and the shuttling pony. Yeah, I remember dress-up day.
Was it once a year that they had the dress-up day? You remember?
Not really. No.
I can't remember either. But obviously it went way back to 32.
Well, it was we were still doing it in the late 60s and the early 1970s, very early 70s.
Yeah. So the cowboy up in the left photograph, his name is Toots, you can tell that they even dressed the horse. And then the middle photo is Ike in his flowered pants, and then Eddie Reich is in his striped pants. That's about the time that Tepee was sold in the early 70s. So, that's a long tradition to have dress-up day. Again, you can see the photos of the tents that the dudes stayed in. These are also 1932 It's the Tepee Rodeo, and this is called Roman racing. And you can tell you have a rider with two horses, and they stand up on top of the horse. And let me tell you, we have pictures of them racing at the Gallatin race field, and I don't have that photo with me. Tempe, Jonathan Javits has that photo, and I can probably put it in one of our upcoming newsletters. But they raced full tilt, so sometimes the riders didn't stay on. So you'll have the horses coming across the finish line with no riders, and then there's others that the riders are just hanging on for dear life. But it's a big thing back then. In the 30s and 40s, there were a lot of races. This is probably not during Prohibition. This is at the rec hall. You can see they are serving Sheridan beer, and there's Coca-Cola bottles. And there was always a dance night. I believe Thursday night was the dance night. I can't remember exactly. Thursday night. I'm showing you also how gentle the horses were. There's 6 kids on that horse. Another early photo, and this is taken to the north of Red Grade Road, down towards Tepee into the high country. The Tepee horses are to the north of Red Grade Road, and you can see the 3 different roads that go down into Tepee and Little Goose Campground. And then up in the upper right photo, you're going to see Ike in a white shirt, and he is cutting ice in the winter. And I'm going to talk to Sonny in a minute about the ice, but they were cutting ice for years and years, 50, 60 years. There was somebody that went in the wintertime and cut blocks of ice out of the lakes for use in the summer for cocktail hour. Then we have this really cute old photo down below. They converted the car into a little truck. And I wrote this story about the history of Tepee, and I'm going to quote what he says about his parents. Alan soon met a lovely young Canadian woman, fresh from the London stage. Her name was Marion Robertson. They were married September 12, 1933. This is the only photo I have that shows Alan not in a white shirt. And this is their family with Ike and Helen. These would have been taken in the 1930s. So there you see Alan with his white shirt with his kids in the middle. And all 3 of these photos were taken at Tepee. Again, Alan with his white shirts. The photo up in the upper left is just a great photo, and it was in the Sheridan Press. Mary Ellen wrote a wonderful story about Alan, and I will have to enter that into the newsletter one of these days, because she did an amazing job writing the biography of Alan. And then we have in the lower left picture, really the only picture that I could find of Mike with Ike. Mike was about 20 years younger than Ike. And Mike is the only one still living, and he lives in Sheridan. This is another early photograph. I'm not sure we ever were able to date this one, but it's probably in the 1940s. They rarely advertised. One of the things that Alan wanted was for the guests to be recommended to stay there. You had to know someone to be recommended to come in and stay. They very rarely advertise, but they do show up in a couple of these advertisements. This one is with the Burlington Northern. The other side, those are Christmas cards that Alan sent, and those are Hans Kleiber's. This was in the Burlington Northern, the map of where the trains would go. All of the dudes for many, many years were picked up at the train station. Then later they would be picked up at the airport. And like I said, coming up and down Red Grade Road must have been just terrific back then because it was very narrow, very muddy, very rutted, and they usually came down twice a day, I think. Was that right, Sonny?
Usually when I was driving, it was 2 to 3 times a day. Once for supplies and any dues, once in the morning taking dues down to the airport, and then the evening plane. So it could be as many as 3 times a day. And yeah, but you got so used to driving that road. If I had a dude that was starting, oh, I'm going to be late for my plane, you got to get me there on time. And I was good enough by then I could dangle those right wheels over the edge of the cliff and turn a $5 tip into a $20 tip.
So this map is dated like 1930. There are 30 dude ranches on this map. That is the state line on the top. And the line goes down below Buffalo and then over towards Grable. There were a lot of dude ranches. And maybe they only had a room here or there in a bunkhouse, but they were considered a dude ranch. That's how people lived and made it through the Depression, was renting out a room or here and there. And of course then they would have then free help because the dudes would pay to be there. And then they would pay for the experience of wrangling or whatever was the job of the day. I mean, some of them were women, and they'd come and clean and cook. So,
Curtis Cattle Company still does that.
yes,
Their cowboys are all volunteers.
all volunteers. This is a wonderful advertisement that Jerry and Sherry Landon shared with us. Beautiful, beautiful photographs. I believe Don Deers was the photographer. And down in the lower left corner, we have Jack Reich is on the horse in the front, and Doc Cannell is on the horse in the back. So I don't know, Laura, if you knew that or not. Yeah.
Judy,
Yeah, Sally.
the photograph on the left by Don Deers won an award from Kodak Company as being the photograph of the year.
Oh, wow.
And they took that photograph and circulated it in their advertising all around the world. That's what Don Deers told me.
Wonderful. Wow. Now that we have everyone in and seated, I would like for the group to know that we have Sally Morton and Mike Morton here. Want to wave? All right. And then we have Sunny Raj also. And then Laura, I'm going to ask Laura to give a little bit of the speech in a minute. Matt, can you wave for us, okay? These people I'm going to be mentioning because they're part of history of the Tepee Ranch. Thanks, Sally, for letting us know that, about that photograph. And as I said, we have the relationship with other dude ranches. This is Bill Eaton, and that's also Marion Fordyce in the upper right photo. Eaton's and Tepee, they would share in dances. They would also have baseball, softball tournaments, and rodeos. The photo that I found in the lower collection of the Dogwood family, the lower photo, is the 1928 PK rodeo. And I had never seen one with that kind of a large format. And just to let you know, Ernest Hemingway is somewhere in that photo. He attended the rodeo. Now, I just realized, like 2 days ago, that Alan Fordyce brought skiing to the Bighorn Mountains. Now that, if anybody knew Alan, you would never think that he would have brought skiing to the Bighorn Mountains, but it's because of Tepee Lodge that we have skiing all the way back into the 30s. And Tepee was open year-round back then until the war came in about 42. So Marion and Alan, they advertised their skiing season. And I'm going to tell you that John and I have skied up in those hills for years. Some of these are from Tower Hill. Some of these are from Little Bear Ski Hill. Some of them are from Cow Camp. the hill above Cow Hill. Some of them are from the Bob Hall pasture, which is on Tepee, and the others are further to the east towards the subdivision, towards Little Goose Peak. So these dudes were all over the mountains. One of the things that I couldn't figure out was the difference in the skis. So my husband helped me understand that these are all cable binding skis. They're very wide, but they are very versatile. And you would have the boots strapped in at the toe, and then you have a cable that goes around the ankle. You can actually walk with them. They're cross-country skis, so the dudes would walk from Tepee to get to the ski hills. You'd sidestep up to the top of the mountain. When you're ready to do downhill skiing, you clipped in, and your heel would be solid to the ski, so you'd have downhill skis. Don't know that they were all that super great, but those are the kinds of skis they had, and I can show you a picture of those in a little bit. This is the tow rope on Bob Hill pasture, and Ike told me one time they think that this is one of the first tow ropes west of the Mississippi. Again, you can see the dudes walking to the dining hall over there to the left. You can see how deep the snow is there. Kind of like our snow this last week. I love this photograph. I don't know who took this photograph, but there's so much history in that photo alone. Down in the corner, there's a really old truck. It's a toy. It must be Ike's toy. There's a toboggan. On the horses, they have a dishpan. So they must have taken the horses with all their supplies for their lunch, their food. And then this man is waxing his skis and getting ready to probably walk out towards the Bob Hall pasture hill. That is Ike and Helen. One of those is taken, the top one is taken from Little Bear Ski Hill. And I'm showing you how many folks were there, like during a week. They charged $5 a day for the first week, $4 a day for the second week, $3 a day for the third week. That included transportation to and from Sheridan.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know what the transportation would have been to get them up there. Could have been horses, could have been wagons, I don't know. But not probably very many vehicles.
Usually used to sleigh back in those days.
So it was a pretty good, like a hay wagon, a sleigh.
Well, yeah, with the skis on it, sled. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Sled.
thank you, bobsled. Yeah, bobsled. Thank you for correcting my terminology. Bobsled type. Where you could haul several, or they could use just a inverted hay sled that you'd haul hay around during the day, and then over the weekend you'd haul your tourists up to the mountains.
Yeah.
Where is Bob Hall Hill from that area?
You know where Hellsberg's cabins are?
Yeah.
It's the open hill that's to the south towards Tepee.
Okay.
And is there a fence that goes up there through Bob Hall pasture now? It's not open now, right?
Yes.
It used to be all open, but now it's fenced. So you'll see that fence that goes right up through Tepee.
Okay. I just had never heard it referred to that name.
And one of the early homesteaders, his name was Hall. His name was Samuel. And we don't know if that was maybe a nickname for him. We don't know who Bob Hall was. As far as I know, I never knew. Does anybody know who Bob Hall was? Don't know.
No.
Might have been the first homesteader, and it was just his nickname could have been Bob.
So they had a tow rope that went up that hill.
Mhm.
I was only thinking of the rope that goes up from Tepee Flats. Or not Tepee Flats, from...
A Little Bear?
yeah.
That was later.
Okay.
Yeah. This one was closer to Tepee, It would go up from Tepee Creek. There was a road from Tepee that would go by the lakes and over towards Hellsberg's cabin, and that's the road that they would have skied on.
Okay.
And then the motor was at the bottom of that hill, like by Tepee Creek. And then it would
So,
go,
it's also where the dump was in our day.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Can't forget that.
Yeah, the dump. I'd love to go to the Tepee dump if I got permission.
There's two of them.
There's two, yeah. And, the other dump would have been up behind the corral.
Yes, it was, and that was when the dining hall burned down in the 1940s, I think, somewhere in there. And there's Model Ts and Sheridan beer cans all over the place. I know the Forest Service frowned at you. You came out with a big load of stuff, but you could walk down in there and find all kinds of things from the 20s and 30s down there. The other one was the one that I dumped in, and it was just garbage, lots of garbage, and occasional bear.
So these are the samples of the skis, the cables. You can see the straps on that left set. It's just leather straps to tie in your toes. And then the cables go around the back of the boot. And then there's clamps, there's little hooks on the sides of the skis where the cables would hook into when you went downhill. And hopefully your ankle wouldn't pop out. But these are cable binding skis, very versatile. The woman in the middle is Marion. So she was a skier. We have pictures of her skiing. And then this gentleman on the right we think is Wales Wolf. He was a wrangler, cowboy, but they sent him to Sun Valley to learn, and he then, 1 week later, was the instructor. This takes you into the 40s, like 1942, and we think he is, Wales Wolf has a Tepee shirt on, and this is at, we believe, at the fairgrounds, and he won the steeplechase. We found that Tepee shirt. It's purple, and so we'll have it on display in the museum this summer. So Tepee shut down during the war years. The horses were taken out over to the east of town. Mike, do you know how far out the horses were taken during the war? Sally, would you know?
How far east were the horses taken during the war?
I was told they wintered their horses around Sussex,
Oh,
Midwest,
And
West,
also around
Tennessee.
and
Okay.
they also wintered one year in Garvin Basin with a bunch of, with Hortons and Eaton's horses were thrown together. I guess it was quite a deal because I was told when they finally started up after the war, they went down there and sorted horses for about a week between the three dude ranches. And there were studs in those horses, so they had colts, a lot of unbroke horses, and that's quite a ways to trail down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they went down around the Cheetah too in that area.
Down around the Cheetah. Can you explain exactly where
So.
Cheetah was?
Yeah, you know all those. Yeah.
Was that further east of Buffalo? Where's the Cheetah? Arvada?
Yeah, it's kind of between Arvada and Gillette, roughly.
All the
Further.
railroad track from Arvada to Gillette, you'll go past the Marlin at the Cheetah. Incidentally, those steeplechase were held up here at the Carnahan Ranch
Oh, okay. All
on the lower road.
right.
And I don't know much about it, but there were more than a few ranchers that put horses in it, and they'd get together and have horse shows and races. But they used to race just west of the old Carnahan place on the lower road where the stone barn is now. that's been remodeled. There's a bunch of cottonwood trees there, and they raised just west of there.
Did they also use the Gallatin's racetrack?
Or did they use the Gallatin's racetrack?
I don't know much about that, but I know they used to race out there and play polo.
Right.
And Mr. Johnson, Ski Johnson, resurrected the old polo field, which is right next to Charlie Whiten's house. And they practice there today on that field. And if you drive up there, you can see the old, one of the far turns on the racetrack that banks. It's pretty amazing, in my opinion, that they banked anything, but they did. And it was out on that big Bar 13 flat, the racetrack. And you can still to this day see the far turn that was banked. But that's all I know about that, way before my time.
We do have some photos of that racetrack, and I'll try and see if Tempe can give those to us to use, and I'll share those with you, because Jessamine has photos of that racetrack.
Judy?
Yeah.
After the war, and my dad and Uncle Jack both told me the story. When they both came back, one had been in Italy and one had been in the western upper theater of Normandy and Germany during war. But they came back, and then they worked for the Bar 13 with a lot of these, like Mike was saying, you had all these hodgepodge, unbroke horses and stuff, and they spent a lot of time breaking horses at the Bar 13, and then there's a store out there about where Mead Creek is. They'd ride them over there. And my dad about got killed coming off that big hill above the polo field today. He had a horse tumble with him there. And that was the end of his rodeo days. That one, but they broke a lot of they spent a lot of time breaking horses for Fordyce after the war. So those wild, kind of semi-wild horses.
Yeah, Mike.
Going back to your ski pictures, I was told by Alan Fordyce that nobody knew how to ski. So they decided to they pulled some money together and decided to send a fellow rancher and friend, Wales Wolf, to Sun Valley, Idaho, which was the first ski area in the West. So he went out there, and he liked it so much, he was supposed to learn how to ski and come back and show everybody else. Well, he never came back that way. He had such a good time, he stayed there, I guess.
Okay, well, then that's why we have these question marks as whether or not that's Wales Wolf or not. We must not know.
That was a different kind of skiing than the soldiers were doing in Yellowstone, which was incorporated or came to be their by the government in 1872.
Oh, 70, okay.
1872, and the soldiers out there were getting around on skis that were 12 and 14 feet long, and they used a pole to push themselves around.
Yeah, that was the old Norwegian ski.
That's the old Norwegian skis.
And then my Uncle Jack was in the 10th Mountain Division during World War II, which was a ski unit, and a lot of the people that promoted skiing after World War II were in it. He wasn't a skier, he was a farrier for the mules. They had mules for packing. And as far as I don't know if Jack ever touched a ski, but he touched a lot of mules.
So after the war, Alan decided to try and sell Tepee, and so he tried to sell to Bob Robertson, who had a ranch at Sussex. I'm wondering if that was the connection to Sussex with Bob Robertson.
I
don't know either. Again, which one is Alan?
Well,
He's in the white shirt. And Bob Robertson, if you know Mike Wallop, Bob Robertson is his grandfather. So the Robertsons had two daughters, Terry and Tony Tony married John Wallop, and that's Mike's dad and mom.
Is that who the Robinson cabin named for?
You know, it's either this family or it could be Marion's last name, Robertson.
Yeah, I never knew.
I don't know either. It's a good question. We don't know if it's Robertson, both of them. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a great photo, and Mike Wallop shared these photos with us since they were in the Robinson family photo album. Now, a couple of months ago, you remember the story of the slaughter on the Otter?
Yeah.
Do you remember the cowboy, Shorty Cadell? He was one of the cowboys that bludgeoned the sheep. He is your cowboy on the left. Now, this was taken 40 years after that sheep raid. The next one over is Jack Reich, that's Sonny's uncle. And then the middle is, of course, Bob Robertson. And then Wyoming, Jack O'Brien is the fourth gentleman with the black hat. There's a new book out about him. He was a cowboy entertainer. He also worked at Tepee for many years. Then the one on the right is Bob Cannell, and that's Laura's dad. We think this is mid-1940s. It's a great photo.
You had a guitar and a bottle of whiskey. You had a party with that bunch.
So, Sonny, how many years did Jack and your dad work for Alan?
Oh, gosh. Dad started after World War II. Jack had worked before. And my Uncle Marvin had also been a wrangler at the Tepee in the 1930s.
Wow.
He lived over in Gillette.
Mm.
He's kind of a big brute. He was the big brute of the family at 190 pounds. But back in those days, but all solid muscle. But he worked he took pack trips up to the Highland there. Jack started to work, started out in Dutch Creek, out in that country there, and then went to the Annex Bar and the 20th Bar for Annex Bar for 20-some years.
But there had a bunch of horse herders out there.
They did, yeah, you're right, yeah, really like this. But anyway, but my dad really started from the, well, he had the horse breaking incident right after the war, and then he built fence, and then he put up a lot of hay at the Annex, and then he eventually took over caretaker at Tepee in the late 50s and ran until we went out of business there in the early 70s, but yeah.
So they probably each worked 30 years, 40 years.
Oh, God, yeah, and then I had my little stint, so we were all, we were all part of the Fordyce deal there. We all admired Ellen, we all admired Ike, and I mean, there couldn't have been a better boss in the world for me than Ellen Fordyce.
Just an FYI, I know where there's a rock out there off of Dutch Creek. It's got Bethure's carved with their date 1889.
Wow.
And I know where their dugout was where they were living in.
Gee,
Depression in the side of the hill out there.
you gotta get that one documented, Mike.
Yeah.
But then it carried on after the war, and this is the Little Bear ski area. The picture on the right, the hill that's the tallest hill with the snow on the face, that's Little Bear ski area. This is Red Grade Road coming up. This photograph came from Tommy Thompson. It came to several different people before I was able to scan it. But these are all now available at the Wyoming room. And I don't know, there's how many 12 different Jeeps in that photograph. And I think in one of these I counted 30-some Jeeps. Now, Vic Garber used to plow the road up Red Grade. We also had Eddie Schunk help with that, Leroy Sackett. So the roads were always plowed to try and get the folks up to Little Bear. Another person who has shared these files is Emerson Scott. He recently shared all of the Little Bear ski area, the Fun Valley ski area, and the Antelope Butte ski area. So all that history, the documents, the photographs are now in the Wyoming room, and it's just amazing all the information that is now available. And in this, you're going to see Jerry Dewey from Tepee Lodge. He paid his membership into the ski club. So I just thought that was funny. I don't think Jerry ever skied, but he supported them, right? Mm-hmm. But that's the connection again, Tepee Lodge, Little Bear ski area. And then we have Doc and Bunny Cannell. They were members in 1956. And down below you have Eddie Shunk. I was hoping that Rosemary would come today. We have Rosemary Barlow. She was a member in 1962. Then the next year, she's Rosemary Shunk. We have Ed and Rosemary in this photo. In the membership dues. And they were, I think, $5 a year, even for the couple. And we have many, many names. It would be fantastic if we transcribe those and get them into some kind of a book. There's a lot of history of people, not only that worked at Tepee, but people who lived in Bighorn and also in Sheridan, who are on the membership list. So this is Little Bear Ski area. The ski tow is going up almost where the fence is there, towards the top of the mountain. The tow rope goes right about where the fence is today. The hut where the motor was and where they had hot chocolate, is that right? Thanks, Laura. Was at the base. You know where the sign is to go into the National Forest? That's about where the hut is located. And so the parking lot is there as well. And I'm hoping that Laura can come up and tell us the story of her mom when she was a ski instructor. Oh, and I don't know if you can use that. This is Laura Canal Galloway.
When I was 5, my parents went up skiing one day, and we were left in Sheridan, my older brother and my baby brother, and I with our babysitter. And we were waiting all evening for them to come home, and they didn't come home. And what had happened is they had a spring storm, and when they got there in the morning, Mom thought that someone had preceded her up the tow rope. But as she went along, she found that it was drifted under and crusted under. And so as she went, she kept trying to pull the rope out of the snow and eventually could not, and it snapped down and broke her leg. And of course, it was running across her leg. She managed to get her ski pole underneath it to keep it off of her leg. And eventually someone else came along and dug her out, and they hauled her to Billings. And it was they screwed it back together, and I think she still has the screws in it at 100 years old. And Jackie will remember this. That spring, we moved to the ranch. Mom had my 1-year-old brother on her back, was on crutches, and my father's entire family from California decided to come to a family reunion. We were not even moved in yet. But anyway, that was her story. The broken leg.
Yeah, I think she said it was a compound fracture and went 2 places. She had a compound fracture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. I appreciate that. I interviewed Bunny about 10 years ago, and she gave me that story. And I just thought it was a fantastic story. I'm so glad that Laura was here and you got to hear it secondhand. The next picture, these photos came from Rosemary. So we do have a York mobile over there on the left. And you can see cars up there. Those are not Jeeps. The little boy in the top photo is Eddie, the little boy. Just thought I had to show that. Then he's down below with his high school buddies. And I just found this was quite fantastic. They would ski all the way into the Shunk cabin. That's up by Big Goose Ranger Station. Then the next day they would ski back down to Little Bear Ski Hill and ski all day. Then they'd ski back to the Shunk cabin. I mean, that's a lot of skiing. And of course they would go by Tepee, and sometimes they'd stop and have hot chocolate or whoever was at Tepee. So that is Eddie Shunk and his high school buddies. So at Tepee, we were talking earlier that there were dances on Thursday nights, but Alan and I loved playing softball. And I don't know what day we were given off, but I think it was Thursday. It was the Thursday afternoon that we got to play softball, the night of the dancing. But
Yeah,
they
usually before the dance, yeah.
they loved playing softball, and so you see Alan in his white shirt, and there are other activities. Now, the lady that's in the upper right corner, that's Sally Morton's mother, and they're going across Lucas Park up towards Highland Park, and then that's Ike down below playing softball. This is the only photo we have of the interior of any of the cabins. This is the Fordyce cabin. The Navajo rugs you see in this photo, there were Navajo rugs for every cabin. I don't know, 3 or 4. Did you folks end up with Navajo rugs when you bought your cabins?
Yes.
Yeah, there must have been, 300 of them for all those cabins?
It's amazing how they held up too.
They're beautiful.
I mean, we'd roll them up in the winter, and then Dad and I, when we'd go up and shovel snow off the roof, we'd check everything like that. And we had enough decon to where we killed about everything that we got to them.
Yeah.
That's Raiders cabin now.
That's right. That's Bill and Jane Rader's cabin. Sally, do you know, was this picture in like Arizona magazine?
Yes, it was taken professionally for something like that.
Mhm.
I can't remember the particulars.
And I think has that article, but for some reason I could never find it. So that's something that we're going to have to look up. It was featured in a magazine. But that is the only interior photo we have. This is another photograph that Jane found on the internet in 1954. And then this is just a great photo of Ike on the left, and then Malcolm and John Wallop, Bob Tate, and then we have Kelly Howie and Ken Schiffer. This is about 1963, and polo had been resurrected, I think, in the 50s, and we always had to fix meals for the lunches for the girls that went down off the mountain with the polo ponies on Sundays, and then they'd come back then after the polo game. And Mike, can you explain how they got the polo ponies down? What path? What trail did they go down? It was like right by the spring. They come straight off the mountain to the east.
Tepee Lodge was down. What was the trail they used? Road.
I don't think you can even
Actually,
see the trail
They
anymore.
went right down the road, Judy.
They did.
I'm
They didn't. They rode down the hill, didn't they, straight off?
We'd write them down, and then a lot of times I would be involved in trucking them back up.
Okay. Because I know there was a trail up there around where the spring is that took off to the west. It goes up to the Aspen Grove, like a shortcut up
The
the
trail
road.
was that
They
the
would
sheep
never
trail?
go on that.
Well, sometimes they use the old stock drive, which
Okay.
went out by where Steigelman's buildings are. There was a trail went right straight up the base of the mountains to Poverty Flat there.
Okay.
People came and went on that, but it was not a good trail.
Not a good trail. Yeah. You can't see it today, can you?
No.
Okay.
Parked up on top of Poverty Flat, came down, they had so much repair work to do. By the time I finished, it was plumb dark and there was no moon. And I had a dog with me, and he knew I was headed back to the truck. Now, the only way I could tell if I was still under the line every now and then, I'd look up at the stars and I could see the wire. The dog was scrambling up the hill, and he was dislodging rocks, and they were rolling down the hill toward me in the dark. I just had to kind of crouch down and hope none of them hit me. And I yelled at the dog exuberantly. When I got to the truck, he was nowhere to be found. He said, "Show me when he hid." I had to come back the next day and find him.
He knew he was in trouble.
And then I worked for Alan up there at the ranch, Tepee, in 57 and 58. Knew three of the Wranglers, Dave Bliss, Scott Reddington, and Harley Abar were some of the guys, and Melvin Walton was cooking. I had daily run down the hill to take the laundry down. They didn't do laundry up there. And bring the laundry down, take the groceries and booze back up the hill. And the first chore in the morning was to get up and saddle all the horses before anybody got up, in case they wanted to go for a morning ride. So it was a pretty good duty. Had a lot of fun up there. Muffy Farnsworth was the postmistress, and Speed's orchestra played for the dances. So, yeah, a little history there. I still play for the dancers up there, by the way, for the Tepee Corporation on 4th of July.
I think you played when I was up there for those Thursday night dances.
Yep.
And I walked that Tepee telephone line down through there. It was a pretty good, well, as a teenage kid then, my main thing was trying to approach a blue grouse. But by golly, there were some of those darn going from tree to tree, and they give me a set of climbing spikes, and there were some adventures. But you're right, that's quite the hillside off of there.
That phone line was made out of every kind of wire you could imagine.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, you just took a roll of something, and it's gonna work one way or the other.
Yep.
Get down to Garber's and haul back up, and see if you're okay.
So this photograph we got from Jerry Landon, and Jerry and Sherry have been so generous to share their collection. I just talked with Jerry about 2 weeks ago, and Jerry is 98 and a half. He was born in August of 1926, about half a mile south of where we are right now. And he worked at Tepee for almost 20 years. And this photo includes some people you might know: Jim Wolfe, Ralph Blaney, Jerry Landon, Lou Kraft, and Reg Bassett, I believe. And the picture on the right is like a pack trip that they would take to the high country. Before John Genereux passed, I was able to interview John. He did the pack trips for Tepee for many years. I never knew that he even rode horses. But he did amazing pack trips and had so many great stories to share. He told me that the trips that he'd like to take with the dudes, it would be 3 to 4 days long. He would take 3 to 4 people, and he would take about 2 Wranglers and then 3 pack horses. In the first part of the summer, they would haul most of the teepees up there and also the kitchen items. And then during the summer, all they had to haul up would be the food and then whatever the dudes would take for clothing. So we have some great interviews of Jerry Landon and also of John Genereux of the pack trips. Now, this is a work in progress. These lists are just being added onto all the time. We have Ralph Goodwin was there for a few years as the Wrangler, but in the middle picture at the top, I want to point out that that's Jerry Landon on the left, and then Charlie Cook. Matt, can you wave to us? Okay. That is Matt's father, Charlie. Charlie was the mountain rider for one of the cow camps, and he would come to Tepee for the dances. That's where he met his wife, Matt's mother, Donna Miller, who lived in the Dewey house here. And of course, Donna's sister is Lois, and Lois Miller was married to Jerry Dewey. So there's a lot of connections here with Tepee, and in Matt's family, definitely. We have so much information that Matt has shared with me, and I'll tell you about this later. But that's Charlie. I think all of us know who Charlie Cook is. Then there's Mike Morton and Jack Caldwell in the top photo. The next photo down below is Scott Reddington and Jerry Landon. And then, of course, Archie McCarty. Archie would be the father of Helen's 5 children, and he married Helen Fordyce. And I don't know how long Archie worked up there, 20 years?
Archie?
Yeah,
He was pretty well gone before I showed up there.
Okay.
So, but through the 50s and definitely in the 60s, early 60s.
he basically did the packing, didn't he?
He did packing, horseshoeing,
Yeah, okay.
about everything.
Everything?
I think he taught Scott Reddington how to shoe horses. That was a,
Yeah, Mike, did you have something?
Well, when I first came to Tepee, he was the packer.
Okay.
And of course, he married Ellen Fordyce. And had a rather large family, and two of the boys now are managing ranches here in Sheridan County. The Flying H Ranch, which used to be the Bar 13 owned by Alan Fordyce, and the NX Bar, managed by Brian McCarty, was owned by Alan Fordyce for a number of years.
I have pictures of both of those boys pretty soon.
How many years was Archie at Tepee?
I can't really say, but I know he was packing when I first got there, because he taught me how to pack.
Now, Mike, you came out to TB in the 50s. When did you first come?
He worked on the NX Bar, I know that for Jack Rice,
Okay. And then
before he was a packer.
do you know when Mike first came?
57.
57.
I remember the story you showing up, Mike. My dad was up there in the caretaker cabin and shared with Jerry Landon. He says he looked out in the spring and in amongst the snow drifts were deeper than heck, and so all of a sudden I see this guitar poke over a snowdrift. And here's this guy walking in, he had a saddle and a guitar. And all I was thinking, good, here comes a ditch digger.
And Mike, you probably did all kinds of jobs for Alan Fordyce. He was
What did you do
everywhere.
for Alan Fordyce?
Hmm?
Alan, what did you do for Alan at Tepee?
Me?
Yes.
Well, I started out as a dude, and I refused to be a dude, even though I didn't know what it meant. So he put me in the corral. I worked in the corral a number of years. And then I learned to pack. I was the head packer for 2 or 3 years. And then I learned to shoe horses up there. I shot horses for 4 or 5 years up there. And then they also taught me how to train and break horses, and I did that for a living for a number of years.
In this photo, we have Dave Bliss, and then Cherry Landon, Sissy Reich, and Eddie Reich, Jerry Landon, and let me see, I can't think of his name, Phil Woods.
Phil Woods.
Phil Woods. And then we have Mike and Sally. Sally's almost out of the photo there. Then Jack Reich, again, on the right, and we have a few photos of Jack. He mainly was a horseshoer at TB, correct? And then otherwise he was out at the NX Bar
Yeah.
doing haying or whatever?
He's running cow operation. Yeah, he basically was a foreman out at the NX Bar. Once he got established there, well, he was out there in Dutch Creek for a while for Alan, then he went to the NX Bar, and then he split around between about anything Alan wanted to do. He's kind of Alan's jack of all trades. Yeah, he did about everything. And he used my dad quite a bit for putting up hay in the summer at the NX Bar and stuff like that. He'd contract with him. A lot of nepotism back in those days.
Something interesting, that Jack was my wife's uncle. And his actually last job that he had was caretaker at Folly Ranch, which we got him a job up there. And he broke his leg, right? We were up there staying and heard somebody hollering at 6 o'clock in the morning. And he had gone on a green horse, it was cold in the morning, and he was kicking himself for even getting on it and spurring it and taking off up the hill, and a horse bucked him off, and my mom heard him hollering up there. He was probably 200 or 300 yards from the cabins. My mom was in early riser, and she woke up and heard him, and we hauled him off the mountain. He'd had a pin in his hip put in several years before that, and it broke his leg right at the. We hauled him off the mountain in his own pickup.
Yeah, I don't know what hurt him worse, that or having my dad teasing him about getting on green horse.
Hi, Teresa. Welcome. It's been a long time since I've seen you. So can you tell me how you are related to Jack Reich?
Mary Ann was my mother's sister, so
Sister.
he was my uncle.
Okay, thank you. I have a picture of your aunt pretty soon.
Yeah.
Mike, did you have something to say?
Well, I'd just like to tell a short story about Jack Rice. When I was first at Tepee, I was 15, 16 years old, and the horseshoer up there got hurt. Scott Reddington was the horseshoer. And they were in a bind because they needed these horses shot because the dudes were starting to pile into the ranch. And Jack Rice drove from the NX bar on Badger Creek for a week straight every day and was there by 6 o'clock in the morning. And he left every day at 4:30 in the afternoon about. He shot 11 horses for 7 straight days. 11 horses a day and did that drive. And he was a master shoer in the Army during World War II. And it was quite a feat. I don't think anybody could do that today.
My God, that's the way we did it back then, cowboy. I'll never forget
Here
that.
we have Sonny's dad, and Sonny's dad is Deacon Reich. He's on the left, and then we have Jack Reich next. They were brothers. Then Teresa's aunt is Mary Ann. She's the third person to the left, and then there's Sissy. Sissy was married to their son Eddie, and this photo was taken in 1970. And then, of course, we have Sonny that's on the right, and I wanted Sonny to tell us about what he did in the wintertime and the cutting of the ice blocks.
Well, in high school, of course, you know, but Dad, for the winter jobs up there, and I'd go about every weekend with him. We'd go up and shovel snow off of the buildings. I think he had a picture one time of me up there that I can't remember what happened to it. But anyway, we'd go up and shovel snow. In the fall, we'd put big logs under all the roof timbers and everything to keep everything caved in. But still, during the winter, you'd have to go up there. That snow would be about a table and a half deep. And so you have to go up and shovel it off, keep the village flat. But then we had the ritual of cutting of the ice, and until the late 1960s, we used diesel generators as our power, and they went off at 10 o'clock at night, and then we finally did power, but we still kept the ice tradition around, which showed some of that showed Ike doing some of the cutting there. But we'd load up a bunch of us high school kids, go up, we'd stay in the cabinet, for a lot of years, Jerry Land, my dad lived there, and then Jerry and Sherry lived there the first year they were married, and then my dad and I lived there. It's kind of an old bachelor's pad there, and we had a whole bunch of, but anyway, but in the winter it'd be, my dad and me and a bunch of high school kids, and a lot of from Bighorn out here, but we'd go up there, and the ritual would be we'd stay in that cabin. We had about 7 or 8 beds, so we had plenty of room in there. We wanted to entertain, we'd take young Mike Fordyce along. He's about 15, 6 years old. Then we'd take Dickie Hosford to beat him up when he got to his hand. But anyway, you go up there, and that ice, the pond was up there behind where the corrals are. And today the EPA, or DQ, would not approve our operation at all. But, so anyway, but you go out there, and there's one story log house along there, and then it had a ramp going up, and then a ramp going down in it. So we'd cut that ice, and start it out, and you'd get it opened up, use it, now the old ice, we still had the old ice saws, you know, for touching up and cleaning up and breaking the ice off. But mostly we used a pretty long bladed chainsaw with an ice blade and no oil. That's one thing you didn't want to. And during the summer you'd have some young kid that grabbed a chainsaw that had oil in it and cut that ice and just ruined it. You use that goddamn chainsaw oil all through the winter. So we'd cut and we'd get it and then we'd float them on down, and we had a claw that came down on a pulley, and you hook that in the back of that ice block, and it probably weighed about 175, 200 pounds maybe. And there'd be a couple, 3 guys inside that would pull on that rope and they'd get that ice up, and then when it tipped over, it shot into that ice house. You got out of the way so you didn't break your leg or break you. And then you drag it around and place it, put sawdust down. We had sawdust we used every year. We shovel out in the summer, and then we're put back as we laid ice in the winter. Put down a layer of sawdust, and then blocks, and then tap in between a little bit, in between the blocks, and until you got, and finally when you got up high enough, that was our ice for the summer. But it was quite an operation. Then during the summers, you took it out, and I had an old 80-inch Ford truck that I used or a tractor with a trailer, and they'd give me a couple, 3 what they called kings. They were basically dude kids, and they kind of promised them, you know, yeah, you'd work half of the day, you know, and for the outfit, and then you could go riding and be a king. You'd live like a king for the second half of the day. Well, then king days didn't. The king part of the day sometimes got swallowed up and everything else. But I'd have like a couple, 3 of those kids that go up and I make sure they can get the chainsaw or anything like that, or you know, little rituals of you know, things where like for cutting wood, I got the double bitted axe, and they all had to use single bitted axes. You know, it's really kind of an interesting operation that way. But then the ice, and we'd go up and we'd figure out, and Nan Taylor, who ran the store there, would tell me who was in what cabins, how much. Then they'd go up and say, oh, I need a block and a half or 2 blocks of ice, and if they're, you know, luckily by then we were still using the ice in the old ice blocks, the old wooden ice boxes. So we'd figure it out. So I'd have to, I had like, what, 23 or 24 cabins. I can't remember how many it was. But I'd have to block out so much ice for each cabin, and so much wood, and then so much diesel-soaked sawdust for starting fire. But the ice itself, you take it and you had to cut the bottom. You had to make sure you got all the algae and stuff off of the back of it and get it trimmed up. Nothing would make one of the little old ladies mad than to look down into her down into her glass of whiskey and see some kind of algae float around. So you had to make sure you had that all cleaned up, ready to go. But then, and so through the summer we just keep working and then shoveling that sawdust out and putting tarps over it so it'd be thawed out for winter again. And it was a daily ritual that kept things going, and we did that really until I left. Last couple of years after I drove truck up and down the mountain, had that job. But I think I did the ice for 2 or 3 years. I can't remember how many. Before that, I helped out on doing it. I started working up there, I guess, when I was about, during the summers, off and on, was about 13, and full-time when I was about 15 or 16. But the ice ritual, and, you know, showing those tongs there, and I just sold them recently, but I remember picking up when I was talking to Judy in the demonstration there. They felt like feathers when I was about 18 years old. Now it felt a bit different when I was trying to demonstrate this now. But it's quite a ritual, and I was pretty happy to have that last part of the Old West there, really, in many ways, to be able to participate in that kind of work. But Tepee was one of my, I think Don't Lake, they still cut ice at Don't Lake. But Tepee was quite the adventure.
It's interesting you should mention the ice, because when I was all this stuff up the hill over there, to keep the ice cream from melting and everything, else they packed it with dry ice.
Oh, yeah.
And, me and one of the other guys had the rest of the day off, you could get all your stuff here early in the morning, came back up the mountain.
Sure.
Then just threw the dry ice away, and I said, you know, it's a shame that ought to be put to some good use. So what we did was, before the help got there, because they ate back in the kitchen, long benches.
Yeah.
We only did it twice, and never figured out what happened, but we took all the dry ice and spread it out on the bench where the help ate.
Oh,
And
okay.
froze the wood. When they came in to eat, it was dry, but they'd sit down on it and they'd,
Whoa.
holy cow.
Dang. Mike, you guys are scamps.
So here we have Helen and Ike, there on the left. This one I think was taken out of the NX bar. Then that's Helen with her two sons, as Mike was describing, that's Martin McCarty and also Brian McCarty. Martin takes care of all of the Flying H lands now, and then Brian is out of the NX bar. And of course, Ellen owned both of those many, many years ago.
Those two boys inherited their dad's business sense, or their granddad's business sense, that's for sure. Yeah, they were pretty darn short by the time that they got into that stuff.
These are the Tepee Polo girls. And we have Janie Huffman, Julie Page, MV Morton. MV is Mike's sister. And Gigi Huffman, Jessie, and Isabel Huffman. And they are the ones who would ride the polo ponies down the mountain to the polo games and back up on Sunday, or the reunions. And this is an overview of Tepee. Basically, when Sonny and I and Mike and Sally worked there, the cabins are numbered and they have the old names that we are used to that were at Tepee. Renee Rodolini, met her, if you know her. She worked up there for many years, and she's the one who helped us identify the cabins and the names, and so did Sally. We had a meeting, and we finally got, I think, the list complete.
I don't remember, I remember the names, but I couldn't, I'm glad you have that map now, because that's, I couldn't go there and tell you what was what.
Me neither. On that map, there are still more cabins that are on the road going in. I think there's still 2 more cabins. We don't have the rec hall on there either.
You got the Queen's Cabin on there?
I'm not sure.
No.
No? Okay.
Did the name Pelletrew come up?
No.
Okay.
I knew them all at once.
I know, we knew them all because that's where we had to go to
Oh,
for
boy,
clean.
Yeah. That Queen's Cabin, that's another story someday we'll talk about.
So to recap, the Tepee ownership, William Fordyce had it in the 1910s and the 20s. And then Alan had it from the 30s, 40s, 50s. And I took it over in 1959 and then sold it in 1972 to the Tepee Cabin Association. What is the name of the association for your cabins now, Joyce? What is it?
Tepee Association.
Tepee Association, yeah. How many cabins do you have up there now? Do you have
25, 26.
Okay.
26.
That's about what we had on our map. So I'm going to tell you a couple of the stories of dudes that were dudes there and then also an employee. So the Huffman sisters, and I'm so glad Mike is here today. I hope he can tell us the story of the Huffman sisters. We have Jessie in the blue. She owns a ranch out at Rosebud. She's married to Tom Alderson. Tom grew up about half a mile south of us. So the Huffman sisters, let's see if I can remember them all. Jessie and Jamie, and then we have Felicity, who is known as Flicka, and Gigi and Isabel. And Flicka, or Felicity, is a movie star, and she was in Desperate Housewives. She is married to William Macy. So, Mike, can you tell us your story of the Huffman girls?
Tell them about the Huffman, the pack trip.
in order there a while back to take care of the polo horses. Because we didn't have time yet to do that at Tepee. We had to take care of the guests. So Ike hired these gals, and they lived in his cabin. And the Ewing family, I got this right, came to Tepee for years, and Mrs. Huffman, their mother, was a Ewing. And they had a lot of riding experiences back east. So they could all ride very well. So their job was to ride the horses during the week and assist in taking him down the mountains for polo and returning him back to the ranch the same day. And we did this twice a week. They now play 3 times a week, but in those days we only played twice. So they learned, I think one just taught the other one, and it went down the line.
It's pretty much a succession thing. One would show up, and next year another would show up.
So when they were little, they were guests.
Oh, they were?
I'm trying to get him to tell a story. They came as a family first.
Right.
And Mike took them on a pack trip to Highland Park. And they were just little girls. The mother was a very eccentric woman named Grace. And Mike was the wrangler. You want to go on with the story?
Oh, okay, and then I took 3 or 4 of them into Highland Lake. And in those days, when you packed, you also had to cook. I was a terrible cook. I didn't know anything about cooking. So, but everything tasted good in the wilderness. So I was cooking breakfast one morning, the first morning, and I was cooking pancakes on a flat grill on open fire. And Mr. Huffman was standing there talking to me. And for those that know Highland Lake, there's a little beach. Not very, very long. It's maybe 30 yards long by about 10 yards deep. And he said, well, look at that. And I looked up, and there's Mrs. Huffman and I don't know, 4 or 5 of those daughters, stark naked, taking a swim before breakfast. Now you can imagine the temperature of that water. Well, I'm trying to cook pancakes, and Mr. Huffman's looking at me when I'm looking at the beach over there. And anyway, I figured I better get in a better position the next morning to cook pancakes. That was obviously quite new to me, but he obviously made those girls get up and go swimming every morning before breakfast.
You probably never heard for help wrangling, did you?
So this gentleman is Don McKinnon, and Ike introduced me to Don through an email, and he said, Don's got some stories for you. And I said, great, send them, that'd be wonderful. I got a call from Ike almost immediately. He says, Judy, you've got to find out who Don is. Can you get on the internet and figure it out? I go, sure. So I get on the internet, and I find out that this is what Don McKinnon had done in his life. His first job was a wrangler, maintenance kid. He was 17 years old. His first job was at Tepee in 1956. And he just loved it here. He worked basically for Jerry Dewey. and Lois. That's who kind of took care of him. And Jerry taught him how to peel logs and build cabins, and then he was also a wrangler. And so that was his first job. When I read about his work on the internet, I think you'll be astounded. He became the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister of New Zealand. He was the longest serving New Zealand Foreign Minister. Then he was elected the Commonwealth Secretary General in 1999 by 54 Commonwealth heads of government. He served 8 years for the Queen. And Don, since he was in New Zealand, I didn't know if he would know when Ike had passed. So I emailed to Don and told him about Ike and told him that the book was about ready to be published. And he sent back this lovely email. And he says, from April 2000, when I took up the role of Commonwealth Secretary General, I usually had 3 or 4 private meetings a year with Queen Elizabeth for the next 8 years. Knowing her interest in horses and cattle, I always made sure there was time to discuss both. So having met some of the Wallet family in 1956 in the Bighorns, then later Senator Malcolm Wallet in Washington, D.C., they could always talk about quarter horses, all those different kinds of horses that he would talk with the Queen, because she had an interest in horses as well. Life on the Wallet Ranch, Sheridan, and the majestic Bighorn Mountains always brought a smile to her. In those discussions, she was always so relaxed and chuckled a lot. And this is kind regards from Dawn. And as you know, Queen Elizabeth came in 1984 and was invited here by Jeannie Wallet. And so I happened to think about this morning. I'll tell you in a minute what it dawned on me. Anyway, Don wrote this book, and I was supposed to receive this from Don as part of his story, and that's like chapter 5 is what Don wrote about his remembrance in 1956 when he was at Tepee Lodge, United States numerous times. And he did come back to Tepee to visit 3 or 4 times in his career, going around the world. This is in 1956 at the corral, that's the picture on the left. And then he's with Lois Dewey, and that's Matt Pan. This is in 2006. And so he then went back home and rewrote the book and had added a lot more to it. One of the things that I was so grateful to get from Matt is that he gave me a stack of letters that Don had written to Jerry and Lois over the years, Christmas letters that they had shared. And I scanned them in and sent them off to Don. This was about 2 years ago, maybe? 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah. I think since Lois passed.
Yes, that's when I found them.
About 18 months ago.
Yeah.
And they were so grateful to get them because they didn't know how often that Don had come back to Bighorn. And so those letters really filled in his biography. So thank you for sharing that. And one of these to Melvine Ralston. Well, it dawned on me this morning that Melvine not only cooks for Dawn, but she also cooks for the Queen. So they had that in common. She wrote this thank you letter to him when she was 98 and a half. And then he also gave one to the Queen. And this is her thank you note. May 28, 2008. Dear Dawn, thank you so much for sending me the story about your time in Wyoming. I shall really enjoy reading it. Such a wonderful part of the world in America. I'm glad to hear you have got your British passport after 69 years. I'm not sure about enjoying the summer yet, or even the cricket at the moment, but I hope it improves. We are up here for the bank holiday weekend, and we are dry in the north, so they're in Scotland for this. Yours sincerely, Elizabeth II.